last summer, I read a book by Marianne Wolf titled Proust and the Squid, where she describes what happens to a child that can't learn how to read, with dyslexia and a whole host of learning disabilities. And in that book, there's a little passage where she talks about Socrates and how Socrates, came from this oral tradition, and he was, railing against, books, and talking about how books are going to come to impoverish the new culture. Because he belonged to this oral tradition, and he used to, think, well, you memorize things, and your experience with human beings is richer. Whereas, you read a book and there's no feedback. Now, I don't know if anybody would argue that books have not been good for humanity for the past 2,500 years. I'm not sure that Socrates could have envisioned, the library at Alexandria and maybe the 42nd Street Library here, but my question is, we're moving, like you say, from a print-based literate society to an image-based society. And I'm wondering, whether, we're moving from a society that's print-based to an electronic society, and where is this electronic thing going? I look at the Nook and the Kindle, and now you have the power to carry 60 books. Don't think you have time to read 60 books, but you have the power to carry it. And I'm just wondering if you can make a comment as to where Socrates was criticizing books and where we are now criticizing this electronic image-based society.
Socrates' fear, and Socrates understood, in the same way that Jesus understood and St. Francis understood, that when moral philosophy becomes written down, when it is written down, in the words of Steiner, it freezes speech. It becomes a form of orthodoxy. And that's what terrified Socrates. That dialogue, that struggle for the moral life, was too ambiguous to ever be codified. And of course, Socrates' greatest disciple, Plato, was a fascist. So he was correctly talking about the danger of taking moral philosophy, which is a form of questioning, and writing it down so that it became a kind of orthodoxy. In terms of the internet, you don't read on the internet. Anybody who's ever tried to read a 5,000 or 10,000 word piece on the internet, if they can do it, you print it out. The internet is, and even if you look at the homepage of the New York Times, it's movement, strobe light, flashing. When I first came back from overseas to New York, one of the hardest things to adjust to was how all images around me moved. And so 2-3 times a week, I retreated into the Metropolitan Museum of Art because I could stand and reflect on something that didn't move. And you look at my son's generation, who are texting and twittering and listening to music, and it has the capacity to destroy thought. Thought is done in solitude and silence. And we live in a culture where we fear any kind of solitude. And we have created such powerful systems of technology. And most of us are hallucinating. We are completely disconnected from the real, from what's real. We've created a virtual reality that we mistake for the real. And as somebody who covered war, one of the most frustrating things, and this is true for veterans or anyone who's come back, is that the graphic depictions of violence, Saving Private Ryan, are so powerful that people think they understand the reality of war. So that those of us who have been to war, we can't compete against those images. We can't compete against the lie of those images, because those images have made people feel as if they have had an experience. But they have been manipulated very skillfully by image makers and turned in a particular direction. Most people who have been in combat, one of the reasons they have such a difficult time speaking about it, and the Army did a study about combat veterans, Army psychologists, that said that for soldiers and Marines who had been in combat, it was the emotional equivalent to being in a severe car wreck where your best friend is killed. That's what war is like. And I live in Princeton. I don't have dinner anymore with like Princeton professors because I can't debate Afghanistan. I know what 155 howitzer shells do to human bodies. I know what iron fragmentation bombs from F-16s do. I know how when a small unit is pinned down, a first lieutenant has the capacity to utterly obliterate an entire village within a matter of minutes. I know all those realities, and I can't convey it under the absurd rubric that we're liberating the women of Taliban, as if once you use the instrument of industrial violence, there is such a thing as human rights. And when you talk about the intrusion or the power of pseudo-events and images, the internet and handheld devices have become tools which, if misused, make it impossible to think and cut us off from what's real. And we have to be very, very careful with these technologies. It's one of the reasons why I have sent all my kids, including my daughter, who wasn't happy about it, for 7 weeks up on the Allagash, where there was no computer, no cell phone, 7 weeks sleeping on the ground, portaging canoes. So at least she stopped, because that's the real world. That's the real world. And that's the world that if we don't stand up, these corporations are literally going to kill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.